All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the 1883 Speaker Series. My name is Mike Wozniak and I serve as the Coordinator of Leadership and Programming in the Student Involvement and Parent Programs Office. In the next 18 minutes and 83 seconds, we will learn a new lesson on leadership, as well as some advice to guide our personal and professional development. For today's speaker, please join me in welcoming Associate Professor of Sociology at UND and former Chair of the University Senate, Dr. Liz Legerski.
Thank you so much for coming out today and giving me the gift of your time. I know time is a precious commodity. I wanted to start off by just talking a little bit about my own educational journey. When I went off to college some 25 years ago, I really had no idea what I wanted to do or what I wanted to study, but they make you pick a major, right? And so I thought, well, what are the courses that I was good at in high school, and what can make me a lot of money, right? You know, that was like the motivation. And I quickly learned in my first semester at college that the major that I had chosen just wasn't really the right fit for me. And one of the things that I loved most about my experience that freshman year was, after a long day of school and work and things, coming to the dorms and having time to sort of decompress with my friends. And I met a friend who was taking a sociology class. And I had never heard of sociology. I did not know what it was. We didn't have that as an option in my high school at the time. And she was telling me, though, about the books that they were reading and the things that they were talking about. And I just found it so inspiring. It was like so engaging and interesting. And I thought, you know what, I'm going to find a sociology class and take that next semester. And so I did. I found actually a social statistics class to take, and then later a sociology of education class. And I am not exaggerating when I say that that decision really changed my life. One of the things that I loved about sociology is that it gave me a set of theories and a language that helped me to kind of make sense of my own experience as growing up in a working class family, and also my experience as a first-generation college student who was, over 1,000 miles away from my family and trying to sort of figure out who I was and what I wanted to do. And so early on, I learned that sociology is a discipline that is really based in and relies on empirical research methods. And that's something that I really loved because it allowed me to combine my interests and skills in math and science to studying human behavior and society. And that was really exciting and engaging. And early on, like I said, I mentioned that I took a sociology of education class. And that really opened my eyes to thinking about how important education is. And I could see, just from my own personal experience, the way that the education was a key to social mobility and economic mobility. And so thinking about the factors that shape people's experiences in educational settings is really critical if we want to understand sort of society at large and the way that the opportunities that people have. And early on, I started to learn the value of educational research and the importance of organizations and programs that strive to make sure everybody has equal access to high quality education. And this is still true today. What I didn't know then, but I know now from being a professor of sociology, is that I was developing for the first time what we call a sociological imagination. And if you've ever taken an intro to sociology course before, you've probably talked about the sociological imagination. And this is a term that was coined by an American sociologist named C. Wright Mills back in 1959. He actually wrote a book titled The Sociological Imagination. And in that book, he talks about, he defines what a sociological imagination is. And it's the ability to see and understand how our own personal experiences and biographies are shaped by larger social structures and histories. And when we talk about things like social structures, we're talking about things that can be kind of more abstract, things like social forces like cultural norms and values. But social structures can also be more concrete things that shape our lives, things like laws and policies, right? And so people like Mills argued that the sociological imagination is more than just an idea, though. It's actually a skill that sociologists seek to hone and that they hope to help their students develop through their coursework. And so he argued that when we're able to sort of see our own and others' experiences and how they're shaped by larger social structures and forces, this actually allows us, it empowers us to critically evaluate those forces, and it provides us with opportunities to either change problematic structures or to also promote and expand social structures that help enable our success, right? So Mills called this the promise of sociology. And now I might be a little bit biased, but I believe that cultivating a sociological imagination can actually help us become better leaders. And that's one of the goals of this 1883 series, is to help us to think about leadership. And in fact, when I think about the characteristics of people who are inspiring and effective leaders, they often exhibit the spirit of the sociological imagination. And so I thought, in honor of Black History Month, that it might be appropriate to mention a couple of leaders who I think really exemplify the sociological imagination. These include historical leaders like the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was actually a major in sociology, but also Shirley Chisholm, who also got a bachelor's degree in sociology. Folks may not be as familiar with her, but she was actually the first Black woman to be elected to Congress, and later she also became the first Black woman to seek the nomination for president from a major political party. She ended up serving 7 terms, in Congress, and she became a really important leader at that time. If you're interested, Netflix actually has a biopic titled Shirley that kind of talks about her history and the important role that she played in that era. If you're looking for a more contemporary example, former First Lady and lawyer Michelle Obama also got her bachelor's degree in sociology before she went on to get a law degree. And all of these people are examples of folks, I think, who exhibit a sociological imagination in their lives and in their work. But you might be asking, well, what if I don't have a degree in sociology? Do I have to get a degree in sociology? And the answer is no, although we would love to have you. I invite you to get a degree in sociology. Everyone is invited to develop a sociological imagination. You might also think to yourself, well, I'm not really a leader, right? And even though it's probably true that most of us will not sort of rise to leading big organizations or institutions like a university, I can guarantee that there are opportunities that you will have in your life to be a leader, right? You might find opportunities to lead at work, whether that's leading within your department or on a special committee. You might find yourself with opportunities to lead in your community at times. There's always opportunities to lead within our social networks and our families. And so leadership really is for everyone. And just as leadership is for everyone, the sociological imagination is also for everyone. And so I wanted to spend a couple of minutes here just going over and thinking about how the sociological imagination can actually enhance our leadership abilities. And there's actual research on this. There's research on the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning that has explored the impact of our efforts to foster the development of a sociological imagination on students. And some of those studies have shown that activities, for example, like that help to develop the sociological imagination also help to create greater empathy. And they also reduce attitudes like victim blaming, for example. Others argue that you can't have a sociological imagination without empathy. And in 2010, there was a sociologist named Sam Richards who recorded a TED Talk about empathy. And in that talk, he argues that the ability to sort of take yourself out of your shoes and put yourself into the shoes of another person was really critical for helping us to see how things like larger structural forces shape our individual lives. And so far, though, I've been talking kind of in very abstract terms about the sociological imagination and what that means. But I wanted to share with you an example of the relationship between the sociological imagination, empathy, and leadership that I think has stuck with me for a long time. And it actually involves a reality TV show, which I know is maybe not the best example. I don't actually watch a whole lot of reality TV. But about 10 years ago, there was a show on the air called Undercover Boss. Did anybody ever watch that? I loved Undercover Boss, right? So the premise of the show was that they would take the CEO of an organization and they would alter their appearance, and then they would send them out into their workforce where they would actually do work, right? And they would have in different areas of their organization, right? And undercover, right? And they would the idea was to get a sense for how their employees were doing and how their businesses were operating, right? And so one episode that stuck with me involved the CEO of Waste Management. And as part of the episode, the CEO, he spends the day actually riding around with a woman named Janice through her garbage collection route, right? And in the process, he learns some of the policies that they implemented from the top, which were intended to boost productivity, right? That's the reason why they put them into place. but that these policies actually really made it difficult for employees like Janice, for example, to take care of her bathroom needs, right, while she was out on the job, right? And as a result of all these pressures to perform, the drivers had actually developed all these really creative ways of taking care of their needs while, like, literally en route, right? And these policies that they implemented, they were intended, again, to improve productivity. They weren't intended to be cruel. They weren't intended to facilitate inequalities among their employees, but the reality was that these policies were impacting their trash collectors in some negative ways, and they were making things particularly hard for their female employees. And so what seemed like a personal, individual problem for Janice, right, was really shaped by larger social structural forces, right? In this case, they were shaped by workplace policies related to breaks and productivity, which were also likely shaped by gender norms and values, right? And so by spending this time to talk with and get Janice's perspective, this allowed the CEO to become aware of the way his company's policies were impacting his employees. And by being receptive to her opinions and her experiences, it provided him with an opportunity to make some changes. And the thing is, changing these policies would not only benefit their female drivers, but they would also benefit and improve the well-being of all their employees, right? So I actually went back and rewatched this episode recently just to make sure I was remembering it accurately. And there was one part of the episode that I totally forgotten about. And actually, while the CEO is accompanying Janice, he gets to see her interact with several customers on her route. And these residents included like several elderly people, at least one person who appeared to have some disabilities. And these residents knew Janice by name, and it was clear that they had interacted with her before. And they talked about how Janice had been so kind to them. They looked forward to seeing Janice on her route every week. And it seemed like a really small thing, but these kindnesses really touched the CEO. And he was actually brought to tears in this episode. And this experience really gave him insight into how kind of their narrow focus on productivity, as measured by the amount of time that their trucks were en route, right, might actually have some unintended consequences, preventing these like small interactions between employees and customers, which actually really brought intangible value to their work and their experience, right? And so this example got me thinking about the role of emotion, both to the sociological imagination, but also to leadership. And in American Western culture, we kind of think of emotionality as a sign of weakness. We don't often associate emotions with leadership. Leaders are supposed to be strong, they're supposed to be stoic, they're not supposed to display emotions. But I see some value in perhaps challenging this idea. And I recently came across an article by an Australian sociologist named Ashley Barnwell, and in it, she explores the relationship between emotion and imagination in sociology. And she points to these examples of the way that sociologists have sometimes directly, but sometimes indirectly theorized the role of emotion and in society and social interactions. And so, for example, she kind of looks at the way sociologists have examined the way emotion shapes our sense of self, or the context in which emotion maybe facilitate a sense of belonging. And ultimately, she makes the case that the sociological imagination is really about emotion, and that it all starts with reading the currents of emotion among others, like noting when people, for example, feel off kilter, or they don't really know why, right? These feelings, she says, may seem like very personal problems, but the role of the sociologist is to identify the social inequalities and the structures that actually lead to those emotions. Now, again, all of this, I've diverged into some kind of abstract, maybe a little bit nerdy, I admit, discussion here, but it all caused me to think about the role of emotion in the development of my own sociological imagination as like a young student many years ago, right? And so after I changed my major quickly, and I kind of dove headfirst into the world of sociology, I got the chance to work as a research assistant on a project, and in that project, we were exploring the impact of a steel manufacturing plant closure on a rural community that was nearby. And this is one of the first opportunities that I had to develop my sociological imagination through actual empirical research. And members of our research team were interested in a whole wide range of issues. And some wanted to know, for example, how this might impact well, it was a large, economic event, obviously, that impacted hundreds of people who were put out of work in a relatively small rural community. And so some of the folks that we were working with were interested in how that might impact things like community cohesion. And others were interested in things like how that might impact people's perceptions of control over their lives. And for me and my mentor, we were really curious about how forced unemployment might impact the gender dynamics of families and couples. And so we created a survey to measure people's experiences and perceptions, and we included an invitation to participate in a more detailed qualitative interview. And we were surprised at how many people actually showed an interest in doing an interview, and we literally had so many people express an interest in talking to us, but we didn't have the resources at the time to talk to them all. So we engaged in this really thoughtful process of sampling as many people as we possibly could from a wide range of experiences and backgrounds, and so that we could create an understanding of this experience using as wide of a range of experiences as possible. My job was to go with a team member to interview some of these men and women who had been forced into unemployment. And all of them had worked for the plant for a lot of them had worked at the plant for decades. Many of them were nearing retirement. Their pensions had been impacted by this bankruptcy, and many of them qualified for workforce retraining opportunities, which they took advantage of, but they often described kind of feeling like a fish out of water, going back to school in their late 50s, right into these college classrooms with all these young students. And a lot of them were really worried about their job prospects, even after this retraining, and they were really dreaded the idea of maybe having to move from their homes and their communities. These were places where they had lived their entire lives, right? And one interview really stuck out to me. To this day, I still think about it. And we had pulled up to this couple's house, and they had a big motorcycle in the front yard, and they had some other things out that signaled that they were a military family. And we were there to interview the husband, and he seemed like this really tough guy, right? And over the course of the interview, we learned how much the couple had been struggling with this job loss, and they were worried actually that they might lose their home. The stress of everything was sort of mounting and building up, and the stress of it all had taken a toll on their family life, and they had a teen son who had run away, and so they were just beside themselves with worry about the future, about their home, about their family, about all of these things. And so at one point, we were talking to this big stoic man, and he just sort of started to tear up, right? And just started to weep. And we were just beside ourselves. We did not know what to do. And I looked over in the kitchen. His wife had been kind of lurking, and tears were streaming down her face. And I was just taking it all in, and I could not help it either. Just tears started to well up in my eyes and just overflowed. And I thought, oh my gosh, what do we do? And I looked to my companion there who was interviewing with me. And she was all wide-eyed, and she just sort of gently said, are you okay? Do we need to stop? Would you like to continue? And he said, yeah, no, I want to continue. And he wiped away his tears, and we sort of moved on from there. And after that event, we went back. Well, this is also how kind this family was, even though in the midst of everything that was happening to them, I didn't really realize what the wife was doing in the kitchen, but she had actually been making a pie. And as we were leaving, she was like, here, I know you're these poor college students, take this pie with you, And I was just like, oh my gosh, here, you're so stressed out, please, don't give us this pie, but it was so sweet. And so when we went back to campus, we returned our supplies, and my mentor was actually still in her office. So I went to her office, and I kind of plopped down in the chair, and I explained to her what had happened. And I may have said something kind of dramatic, I just ruined an interview, I don't think I'm cut out to be a scientist, or something like that. And she kind of looked at me a little bit perplexed, and she was like, well, how exactly did you ruin this interview, and why can't you be a scientist? And I just blurted out, I cried, right? I cried, scientists don't cry, I ruined the data, And she just chuckled at my outburst, and what followed was this really great conversation about what it means to be objective, and about how our emotions help drive our work, and how our emotions help connect us to the people that we study in really important ways. And this experience became really formative to me in this moment where I was developing my sociological imagination, and it taught me the value of empathy. It taught me the importance of putting ourselves in the positions of others so that we can understand their experiences and their perspectives. And it taught me the value of working to give voice to people who are potentially voiceless. And I've since then learned that scientists do indeed cry. They are not dispassionate robots, right, who just gather data and crunch numbers. They are humans, and they invest so much of their time and themselves in their work. And all of it is often driven by a desire to make the world a better place. And I think that these same characteristics apply to the leaders that I admire most. They're motivated by that same calling. And I'm just really grateful for a discipline that has allowed me to develop a sociological imagination. I'm grateful for a discipline that values and welcomes diversity of human experience and that fosters empathy and understanding. And I hope that you will join me. My invitation to you today is to exercise your sociological imagination as you find opportunities to lead in your life as well. So, thank you.
All right, amazing. Thank you, Dr. Legerski.
Yeah.
Thanks to all of you for coming. Join us next week when we welcome alumna and co-owner of Brick and Barley, Level 10 in O'Reilly's, Sarah Horak. Have a great rest of your week.